I think this is it, man. I think that's probably the end of the Zach Wilson era with the New York Jets when you get benched for a practice squad quarterback who is coming in running a let's say fake offense, coming in running a fake offense and moving the ball significantly better than you were all season. It seems like this is it. And we can talk about what we've learned from the Zach Wilson era. We can talk about where this goes. I think there's a lot to chew on here. So as you're kind of sitting in that understanding and that feeling that this was it for Zach Wilson, what were you thinking about?
Right off the bat, it was when he came back to start last Sunday or 4 days ago, it was like, okay, he's been able to take a breather. He's out of the spotlight a little bit. Okay, maybe he's repackaged himself, because I think a lot of his woes have come from it being too fast for him. So maybe, hey, he doubled down, he narrowed down his playbook and knows what's good for him and how to progress through the stuff that he wants to get through. And then watching him on Sunday, I was like, okay, all right, there hasn't been much improvement. So right off the bat, as I saw kind of Sunday's game tail into this game, it was like, oh boy, this is a bow on what's going on here. And what the thing is too, because he's so highly picked, because the rest of the team is ready to go, it's kind of like, okay, this is it. Like, you can't keep him as a backup. So now you're looking for trade fodder. And then now you're looking at the Rosens of the world. You're looking at that, but that was Rosen after 1 year. Like, this is after 2 years. Like, these are quick, get him out of here kind of movements. And the fact that when we've seen Mike White and we've seen, run around quarterback from the Jack, he's a Coyote. He was a former Gopher, but I think he's a Coyote. But we see him running around and everything just picking up and actually doing something and moving the ball. It's like, hey, there actually is some pieces here. That's always been the frustrating thing, is we know some of these guys around them, offensive line and receiver talent, is solid or good. But in fact, like Garrett Wilson and stuff, and watching him kind of flounder, and just watching it again, you almost felt bad for him by the end. It wasn't like, oh man, look at this, but it was like, man, he could barely even operate the offense. It felt like every third down was like, hold on to your hat. Even like Kirk Herbstreit and Al Michaels were kind of going, and we got another third down. And it was like that kind of like, whenever you get that feeling with a quarterback, it's like, man, he's got to get to new greener pastures or something.
If he gets traded, he's a $3.8 million base salary next year, 5.4 in 2024. There'll be no guaranteed money left on his deal. I think that base salary might be guaranteed. So I don't know how much a team would be willing to give up if they couldn't just move on from him after next season. I would assume that some team will want him just on the off chance they can do something with him. He was the second overall pick in the draft, but the trade, what they can get for him and all that, I don't think that really matters. I think that's way down the list of concerns or considerations.
Yeah.
I went back today and I watching that game in the second half when there really wasn't much to pay attention to. And I listened to the Zach Wilson portion of our 2021 pre-draft podcast, because I wanted to, it's been a discussion point tonight on the internets about, is this revisionist history with Zach Wilson? With everyone saying we should have known from Zach Wilson's tape at BYU that some of this stuff might be possible. And I remember being so impressed with some of the off-schedule, not even playmaking, but just some of the throws. Some of those like one-footed, outside the pocket, launch the ball off platform throws. The arm talent, you think back to that throw during his pro day, it's impressive. He can do some of that stuff, and it looks pretty. It's cool. But the thing I just couldn't get out of my head watching him at BYU, and we talked about it on the show, the only game that season, his final season at BYU, that you even saw him have to deal with a little bit of traffic in the pocket was when they played Coastal Carolina. Other than that, he was working in these massive pockets with no one around him ever. It was hard. And I went back and probably watched 4 or 5 games from his at BYU that year, and you couldn't find half a dozen examples outside of that Coastal Carolina game of him having to navigate not even pressure, but just someone around him. And that aspect to the pre-draft qualification process, to the scouting process, not having that information was worrying to me. So I don't know what he's going to look like when he has to deal with even a little bit of pressure in the NFL, which he's going to have to. It was just such a huge step from what the circumstances were at BYU, the talent he was playing with up front, even the receivers that he had. Those guys were ball winners. They went out and made 50-50 plays. It was just such a huge jump that I was concerned about what it would look like. That timing, feel, ability to navigate crowded, muddy spaces that you're going to have to do in the NFL, we had no information on it. And the information that we finally got, the answer that we finally got, he can't do it. It's just the aspect to his game where he has zero feel for how to navigate that space. Justin Fields holds onto the ball a little bit too often. Justin Fields can make plays moving around in the pocket. Zach Wilson's just tendency to, every single time there's somebody flashing into his face, to bail 15 yards deep
Yes.
and try to roll out and chuck something down the sideline. It's just not a sustainable or viable way to play quarterback in the NFL. And it's all he is. 2.5 seasons, 20 plus starts into his career. It's not getting any better. And I think that's what's brought us to this point.
Yeah, it was a late rising quarterback out of nowhere in a COVID year, like when it was just crazy year and how schedules were going and competition and who's sitting out for the year. And he's just dominating, just, not the greatest schools, not the greatest competition. Like when you had to go through, and that's the thing is, yes, there's always going to be a pedigree with the big school guys, but you watch a Clemson or an Ohio State with Fields or Trevor Lawrence, and you're watching them, they're going against, some damn good competition week in, week out. You're watching Zach Wilson. It's like, well, you only can watch his last year, and it has to be the COVID year, and it has to be when they're playing this school.
Troy.
Maybe
Troy had the best front he played against that year outside of Coastal Carolina.
Coastal Carolina was a good school, but it's Coastal Carolina. I mean, Coastal Carolina compared to Clemson or something.
Houston. They played Houston that year.
They did play Houston,
That's
and
the
he
team
didn't
I
look
was
great
thinking
against
about.
Houston.
Yeah,
he had a couple flash throws, and so you always had that. And watching them in that offense, I totally agree. And I always had reservations with him. I felt like I was getting gaslit a little bit when people were just like, "Yeah, he's the easy number 2 over Fields." Man, I even like him better than Trevor Lawrence. And this is where I've become a caricature myself. Always talking about process with guys. That was the big thing with watching Zach Wilson was BYU with their talent advantage. They're only running 3, 4, 5 concepts and just dominate. And I always talk about these. We have better players than you concepts. 989, Y cross, just where they could go and win. And he just had to put it into the realm. Just throw a grenade. He didn't have to throw a javelin and nail, or a bow and arrow and just nail the throw. So that happened just over and over. Yes, you grade to the flash with quarterbacks. Like, yes, they can do that throw, but the down to down process has to be good. And he was the perfect example of that. I saw the comparisons to Rodgers, to Mahomes. And that's what's always going to happen when you watch a Mahomes and Rodgers, apparently too, is that they do a lot from the pocket. Then they do the flash stuff off. You have to do both. And that's the thing is when you're grading only to the flash stuff, it's like, well, the flash stuff is when you're better than everybody else at the NFL, which doesn't happen very often. So what can you do when you guys are all equal? And that's why I was always so worrisome with them. Then that's the thing. I still had like a middle, late first round grade on him. I wasn't like, oh yeah, he's a 3rd rounder, 4th rounder. I won't say I was like that. I still had that grade because yes, they had the flashes, but that's the thing. He was a little smaller too. When you're a good athlete, size matters at this position. Guys under 210, it's not a great history for quarterbacks under 210. That was my biggest knock on Ritter coming into this draft too, is because we're an athlete and being big like Fields or Trevor Lawrence and being that size, at that athletic ability, that adds up. So it's just, there's a lot of more warning flags with him that I think people realize because they just saw the flashy throws and didn't see the process and the efficiency and sustainability that you have to play quarterback in the NFL.
So now we'll see what happens with his future, obviously, where he goes and who wants to take a chance on him. But it brings us to what the Jets are going to have to do at quarterback. And we've talked about this a little bit and what their options might be. They're going to be picking in the middle of the draft. They're 7 and 8 right now. They're going to be picking somewhere between. I'm actually curious what their pick is right now, but they're not going to be picking in a range where they're going to be able to draft somebody.
You
so
got
right now is
a bookmark, don't you?
I should at this point. So right now, as it currently stands, the Jets have the 15th pick in the first round, at being 7 and 8. Okay, so they're probably not going to be in range to get one of the top guys that you'd want to bank on starting early. Yeah. This group of potentially available veteran quarterbacks, I think, is better than some of the groups that we've seen over the last few years, if it includes Carr. So if it includes Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo, that's the type of quarterback that this team should go after based on what's an option and based on where they are in their team building process.
Exactly.
This team with Jimmy Garoppolo, and you would hope a better offensive line. I think that's the other takeaway from their personnel on offense from this game. They're just so banged up. And so, I mean, you get AVP back, and
it's like boom. Yeah, it's a huge bump.
So hopefully the offensive line healthier next year is just a better group. But if you drop a Jimmy Garoppolo type quarterback onto a team with an improved offensive line from what we've seen from them for the past 8 weeks since everybody went down, and this receiving talent with the defense, and these are all, who knows how good the defense is going to be next year. Okay. They might take a step back. Defense isn't as sustainable, but they have a lot of talent on that side of the ball. The core of roster talent they have and all of the young pieces that they have, I think that going out and getting somebody that can help them and be a stabilizing force for them at quarterback right now, I think that is the move. And I think the Jimmy Garoppolo thing makes total sense. There's familiarity with the system. There's so many aspects to it that I think the overall fit for what he can be for them makes sense to me. And then the other guy is Carr. Like what Derek Carr is compared to what they've gotten at quarterback with Zach Wilson. Even if you're not that high on Derek Carr, it makes a world of difference.
Mike White seems so much better. Derek Carr is way better than Mike White.